So I'm playing around with the title of this content. For anybody who's been paying attention to my stuff for a while, one of the very first talks I ever did around Agile was called Why Agile Fails and What You Can Do About It. And it's interesting, right? So that whole talk was really around our collective ability to form teams, give those teams really steady backlogs, and the ability to produce a working tested increment of product at the end of every sprint. And so what I was doing really during that case or during that talk was making a case that organizational transformation isn't really about teaching people Scrum or SAFe, really the practices of Agile. It wasn't really even about changing the culture, although all those things are of course important. What it was really about changing the organizational structure and the organizational design to create the right ecosystem for actually being able to do Agile, right? I mean, it's like such a common question. It's like, how do I do Agile when I can't form teams? How do I do Agile when I can't get a product owner to build a really solid backlog? How do I make unique commitments when I can't establish stable velocity, right? So that was really what that talk was all about. And, kind of in hindsight, it's really been, the foundation of really everything that Leading Agile has done over the last 6 or 7 years since we really introduced that content, really in the last 10 years since we started the company. And where we're headed now, right? What we've been doing over the last couple years in particular is really leading some transformations in some really large organizations, some global type companies, tens of thousands of people, right? That kind of a thing. And really learning a lot about what are the mechanisms associated with orchestrating a transformation. And then really like where it kind of starts to go is like really what's the difference between like Agile at the team level versus Agile at scale. And then there's this word that we talk about a lot that is called business agility. And it's like what is the difference between team level agility, maybe enterprise agility in an IT organization versus business agility? Does one precede the other? Are they the same thing? Or, so like what's really going on? And so I was talking with Candace, our one of our marketing people, and Tim about the idea of maybe a little bit of a play on that early talk of why Agile fails, and talking a little bit about why Agile transformation fails, or maybe why business agility fails, right? And really trying to expand the conversation. We've been doing this little thing within Leading Agile we call Elevate Agile, right? And we're trying to figure out like how do you expand the conversation about Agile and make it really relevant to executives. And the thing that concerns me, and this isn't new or anything, and I imagine it probably concerns everybody to some degree, but if we continue to talk about Agile at the team level, but we really want to generate business results and we want to get the attention of executives and we want to get ground cover and we really want to do business agility, we have to figure out how to bridge the gap. And that's what our Elevate Agile message was all about. So I'm going to start to lay a little bit of the foundation for this conversation. And this is like pretty new content. It's kind of cool to be able to do this content in Atlanta. I live in Atlanta, and this is where I grew up as an Agilist, and early days at Check-Free and early days at version 1. And it's where we started Leading Agile. It's where we're based. And so it's cool to pilot some of this early content with you guys and to talk about it. So really kind of exploratory, right? I think the talk's authoritative. I think it's right. As we go deeper into it and we have more of these conversations, we're going to build out the story a little bit more. But as you might imagine, it's a really big story to try to hit, within an hour. So I'm going to drop into this a little bit. Let me see here, see if I can figure out how to navigate this. So I want to start off, and I want to talk a little bit about what executives care about when it comes to transformation. And I want people to be really clear. This really hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, even in almost any of my talks on Agile transformation, one of the things that I try to anchor on is this idea of executives don't champion Agile projects or Agile transformations because, they're trying to empower teams and create great work environments and things like that. I mean, all that's important, but it's somewhat secondary. Almost everybody that we talk to in some form or fashion is trying to figure out how to get greater predictability, better quality, early return on investment, basically being able to put product in the market and be able to sell it, be able to start generating revenue early. They want to save costs, right? They think Agile is going to make them more efficient, right? So whether they say efficiency or cost savings, it's usually that kind of a thing. Sometimes it's like product fit. It's like, are we building the right things that our customers want to buy? Are we able to be innovative? Are we staying ahead of the curve? That kind of a thing. Sometimes it's a few of those things. Sometimes it's all of those things, right? I mean, it's like that's the class of value prop. A lot of times, like when you get into the enterprise and you start to get into very like C-suite kinds of conversations, the conversation starts to flip to, are we aligned as an organization to realize our strategy? You know, as a transformation company, a lot of times I'm not coming in and helping them trying to figure out like where they're taking the company. But in the presence of a strategy, right, is that strategy executable within the framework of the IT organization that they have, right? Can they take that strategy and turn it into initiatives and have those initiatives be executed through the product delivery organization and put into market in a way that achieves the objectives that the strategy was intended to produce. And so as Agile goes bigger and you're dealing with Fortune 100 companies and, you know, automotive manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies and financial services companies and banks and things like that, telcos, right? We're dealing with like, can we actually solve the problem that these guys are trying to hunt in order to be with Agile, right? Are we able to use Agile to solve that problem? So the first point that I want to try to make is that when we introduce Agile into an organization, it's not about division or team or even product level efficiency, right? It's about are we achieving the strategic goals of the leadership team? And as Agile gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it gets talked about at HBR and things like that, that's the expectation. And what was really kind of the impetus for a lot of this talk and a lot of my way I'm thinking about it is I was walking in and you guys have probably, some of you guys have been following my stuff for a while. It's like I think I talk a pretty good enterprise game, and I've done a lot of C-level kind of sales and engagements as we've built Leading Agile up. And what I was starting to find is I'd walk in and I have a conversation. As soon as you mention the word like safe, or you mention the word Scrum, people are like, oh, that's the team level stuff. I'm not talking about team level agility. I'm talking about business agility. And it's like somehow the connection between what we're doing at the team and the departmental level is getting disconnected from the enterprise value prop or the executive value prop, right? So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is as we orchestrate an Agile transformation, we have to be able to measure the progress, right? We have to be able to give an indicator of dollars spent or coaches hired or whatever, to are we actually moving the organization in the direction that we intend to move it? How do we know, right? Is it the number of Scrum Masters hired? Is it the number of product owners installed? Is it the number of teams that have been trained on Scrum or Safe? Maybe, right? But those things are often vanity metrics in a transformation because, as you guys know, it's super easy to have an army of Scrum Masters and not necessarily produce anything. It's pretty common for people to have been trained on Safe, but the organization is still underperforming because of the structural alignment issues we talked about, the inability to form teams, the incongruence between the IT operating system and the program and portfolio governance that's in play. And so what we want is we want metrics, we want progress metrics that actually reflect being able to move the organization into the set of characteristics that we believe are actually going to help it improve. And so, we start to measure things like, do we have encapsulated teams that are formed around value? Right? Is that value aligned with how the program and portfolio governance is executing? Do we have a good set of Agile metrics that we can really rely on in order to be able to measure the financial performance or the progress against the products and the strategy that we're trying to execute against, right? Can we actually measure how well the organization is performing over time from the baseline of where it started to where we want it to be? And so we talk about things like that as, how many teams have we formed? Like, have we gotten the right governance in there? Do we have the right metrics? Can we state unequivocally that the organization is more predictable? Can we measure that it's reducing batch size? Can we measure that it's putting product into market faster? Can we measure the quality? Can we get feedback from the customers? Things like that. That's what executives are looking for, right? So value is the ultimate thing, right? And so everything that we do has to link to value that executives care about. And then even in the best of circumstances, the things that we measure in the transformation are leading indicators. They're like a hypothesis that has to be validated, that such that, we can start to anticipate if we're going to get the lagging indicators, which is really like the measurable results, right? So we might hypothesize that we're going to form these teams around these business capabilities or these value streams or these products or these feature sets, and we're going to govern them in this way, and we're going to measure the performance of the transformation, the performance of the organization in these ways, and we're going to put together this end-to-end system within a vertical slice of the enterprise, right? Some portion of the organization that we care about, and we're going to measure that progress. But even that, it only goes so far, right? We have to be able to demonstrate that we are actually building a product that people want to buy, and that we can actually put it in the market and sell it, and that we can actually get customers to engage, right? All those kinds of things. And that's going to create a virtuous loop between the measurable results and the left side is, are we delivering the value that the executives care about? And so I say this to you, right? Because if you're a coach and we're talking about, success as, again, right, it's all important stuff, but, is the team doing great retrospectives? Is the team happy? Is the team establishing stable velocity, right? Okay, cool. Like maybe at the tiniest level, that all that stuff's really important, but if it's not rolling up to the strategic value that the execs care about, it's really going to be very difficult for the organization to live through the disruption that you're asking of it, because people can put up with a lot of stuff if they're seeing results, right? It's almost like being on a diet, right? If you're watching what you eat and you're exercising, you're not dropping any pounds, right? It gets super frustrating. Well, for executives, it's kind of the same thing, right? We're investing in Agile Transformation, we're hiring coaches, and we're paying consultants, and we have people on staff, and we're upheaving the organization all this way. And if I'm not getting better strategic outcomes, then I'm going to get frustrated, and I'm going to want to quit. Right. So that's kind of like that's like the highest level thing that I wanted to explore with you guys today. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unpack it a little bit, and I'm going to start to explore the things that I think that are missing in the conversation around Agile and Agile transformation. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why business agility fails. Okay. So why Agile transformation fails, why business agility fails. I've been playing with titles, so I might call this why business agility fails at some point in time, but you guys are watching me figure this out in front of you. So it's pretty cool. I'm trying to see what kind of language sticks. So sustainable business agility, right? So developing an Agile business model, an Agile operating model is only part of the story. Right. So you think about it, right? You got team level operating models, you got enterprise operating models, we have the business operating models. All this stuff has to be in alignment. Okay. And that's like a big part of the story. Getting there safely in a reliable and predictable manner is absolutely critical. One of the things that I find particularly frustrating, and it's really difficult to ask an organization to do this, it's like, we have this notion in Scrum sometimes that we're going to install Scrum. Scrum's going to show us our impediments, and then we're going to fix those impediments as we go, and we're going to improve. And that can work, right? Especially in smaller organizations or departments and things like that. But when we're dealing with an enterprise where we're making investments and we have to tie up the strategic value, stubbing your toe, 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 removing impediments is pretty exhausting. What I find generally is about 90% of the stuff that's going to go wrong, we can kind of anticipate up front. And so when you can start to anticipate the kinds of challenges you're going to have organizing your teams around the business architecture and encapsulating technology and the nature of dependencies you're going to have to deal with, and the way that that new team level departmental operating model is going to interface with the governance model and the program and the strategy and all that stuff. Those are all knowable things. And so this idea that we're just going to go into it and we're going to discover these things is really frustrating to executives, especially when they're problems that we know. Okay. And so we have this aversion sometimes in Agile to planning. But it's like, we don't want to pretend we don't know things that we actually do, right? So in some form, like, we need to put those things that we know into our backlog, and we need to anticipate them. And we need to be really clear with our executives if they're going to need to refactor a legacy mainframe in order to be able to create a services-oriented distributed architecture so we can form teams around it, right? That's not the kind of thing you just want to start doing Scrum and learn, right? That's something that we know in advance, and it's something we can anticipate, and it's something that we can do in a really structured and controlled manner. But then finally, right? So business agility, it's interesting, right? Where I think the conversation is going to end up, and this is from some of our work with some of like our really largest clients, is that the ability to deliver products with agility, right? The ability to inspect and adapt around feature sets, so we build the right products for customers, is only like one level. The real key is do we have the ability to spin up and deploy different capabilities as the strategy and market changes? That's different. So it's almost like sometimes in Agile, we assume that the organization is static and it's the work that flows through the system that is variable. But when you're faced with something like a pandemic, right, this COVID-19 thing, and it's not just about what software do I build, but it's like, what capabilities do I need to spin up and deploy to make major pivots in market to respond to something that was totally unknowable? That's where we start to get in a conversation around business agility, right? And so it's interesting. So business agility kind of exists on two levels. It's, can I, as an enterprise, adapt my current flow of work, right, through this enterprise system to deliver enterprise goals? But then there's also, can the organization dynamically change its internal structures and its internal makeup and its internal set of capabilities so that it can pivot to new opportunities when it learns them? Okay. And so if we really want to solve this problem for the largest of the large customers, that's the level at which we're going to have the conversation. And so what's fascinating, right? And this is what I think is so interesting. And I talked a little bit about going into different scenarios with different customers, and you start to talk about Scrum and you start to talk about SAFe and things like that. And the conversation gets shut down because we've been doing this for 19 years now. And you know, candidly, we all have to admit, right, the earliest days of this were small Scrum teams. What was it? The Sutherland case studies around Patient Keeper, and the C3 or C2 project up at Chrysler, where Ron Jeffries and those guys kind of cut their teeth, right? I was sort of a big student of Alistair Coburn back in the day. And you know, so I really learned a lot of my Agile fundamental stuff from those early small team projects, where a lot of what we were doing was really taking software development and we were trying to figure out how to pull like projects out of ditches and figure out how to do things faster. But it was really small and it was really at the team level. And so that's where we grew up out of, right? And so the beauty of like what we've learned over the last 20 years is that this stuff truly scales, right? We know it scales, right? And we're seeing evidence of success in the large. But oftentimes how Agile is talked about and practically implemented, it's around team level stuff and it's around software stuff. We had a conference last year we called Elevate Agile, and had about 150 people come. It was kind of cool. It was like a nice little pilot thing where we were talking about some of these ideas. And even when you're trying to have this bigger conversation, It's like we always start with the team. And because we know that team level agility precedes enterprise agility, which precedes business agility, but as soon as you start talking about team level agility, you lose people, right? Because for 20 years, we've been doing team level agility and we're learning how to do bigger stuff, but there's a lot of people that shut off because of their past experiences around it. Okay. So one of the things that I'm starting to figure out how to do, and I'm trying to learn how to communicate this, right? So any feedback you guys want to give me, connect on LinkedIn, let me know, right? Message me, right? Whatever. I'd be interested in your take on it, is we have to figure out how to start to separate this conversation. So a lot of times when I'm in a conversation and I want to talk about business agility, the first thing I do is I acknowledge, okay, this is what team level agility is. And this is why team level agility is important. And I'll continue to anchor down on the idea, talking about teams, I know we want to talk about business agility, but this is team level agility and this is where it fits. And this is often your historical reference point when people say agile. This is what it is, team level agility, okay? So let's take that, recognize what it is, recognize the value it's provide, recognize how it works, teams, backlogs, working tested software, Scrum, XP, technical practices, all that stuff, all awesome stuff. But it's like team level fundamentals. Okay. And so I want to take that, I want to diffuse that conversation, and I want to put team level stuff in a box. And then the next piece that I need to acknowledge now, because we're probably 10 years into this conversation, I'm thinking about, I'm trying to think like when Dean Leffingwell's first book around scaling software, I guess, no, it's called Agile Software Requirement. No, Scaling Software Agility. Yeah, that's what it was. Because it was like during the time when he was like partnering with Rally, early days of SAFe, things like that, and was just starting to define the SAFe methodology. And what's interesting about when we went from team level agility to a conversation around enterprise agility, right? What we kind of did is that when we were at the team level, we were always trying to focus on the business, right? So the early XP teams talked about having an on-site customer, right? That's kind of the business. Scrum talked about a product owner. I always looked at the product owner as a proxy for the business, right? So the product owner kind of abstracts a bunch of complexity of the organization so that the team has a single point of view, right? And then we came with Scrums and chief product owners and things like that. But enterprise agility, when like things like SAFe and LESS and disciplined agile delivery kind of came into the market, what we really started to do was we really weren't dealing with enterprise per se, right? What I think those methodologies did is they really introduced the idea that delivery wasn't a single team problem. Delivery is almost always a multi-team problem. And so even though we had the best of intentions of integrating the business into that process through various governance mechanisms and various product owner roles and chief product owner roles and alignment to portfolio and things like that, in practice, what I think we really did as an organization is we basically said, we've got lots of teams and those teams have dependencies between them. And so what are we going to do with all of those dependencies? And so my hypothesis is, and I haven't validated this with any of the people that do this, but it's like when I look at SAFe, what SAFe is really doing is it's saying, okay, I got bunches of teams and I got a lot of dependencies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the sprints and the teams and the dependencies into this broader PI planning kind of event. And I'm going to put this unit of teams, this group of teams on a cadence, right? And they're going to be able to deliver something in an integrated, dependency-aware fashion while maintaining as much of the lean and the agile stuff that we can do in the presence of dependencies. And, even still on LinkedIn, I see people talk about SAFe and things like that and, how heavyweight it is and all that kind of stuff. And the reason why SAFe is so heavyweight is because dependencies get in the way of agility. And anytime you put in a mechanism to deal with dependencies, you're going to introduce complexity. But one of my favorite things to say is that when you have dependencies, you have to manage them. You only have two choices with dependencies. You have to manage them or you have to break them, okay? But for the purposes of this conversation, right, when we're talking about enterprise agility, what we're really talking about is work group agility. right? And sometimes an organization is small enough that where work group agility is sufficient. If we can organize around a product or a set of products or a product with a bunch of sub-products or like a value stream or something, and we can encapsulate that value stream and all its dependencies into this big planning unit, then safe is totally fine. The big difference I think between less and safe, I'm sure there's a lot of differences between less and safe, is that less really focuses on how do you break dependencies from a technical perspective over time. And one of the things I think is the challenge with less in practice, even though I think it's a really solid model, is that those dependencies do indeed exist, right? So if you put less kinds of stuff on top of teams that have lots of dependencies, it's not going to work, right? And there's lines and there's stuff in Boss and Craig's model where they talk about breaking those dependencies, but it's not like a methodology that you go learn, right? It's like work that you have to do, right? Those are the impediments that you have to remove. I mean, almost all impediments in some form or fashion can be described as dependencies between things, right? So when we remove impediments, we're really talking about removing dependencies, okay? And so, so team level agility, product owner is the business, right? Enterprise level agility, the program and the portfolio kind of represent and proxy the business and all the roles associated with those different layers of governance. But the differences between the enterprise level agility, methodologies really comes down to how many dependencies are they willing to live with, right? And so when we started talking about enterprise transformation, the conversation we were trying to have is like, look, let's be really super pragmatic about this. It's like, I don't really care whether you do SAFe or less or Scrum or XP or whatever. I've been methodology agnostic for a long time, right? All of the methodologies out there are built on common reference architecture, teams, backlogs, working tested software, structure, governance, and metrics, either manage dependencies, break dependencies, use lean and Kanban. It's just like all the same core fundamentals at the end of the day. So it's like, I'm not really hung up on methodology, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that the methodologies that we're going to choose are congruent with the operating model of the organization that we have, right? So if we're just going to apply SAFe, then we need to have encapsulated value streams. If we're just going to teach people Scrum, we need to have encapsulated teams, right? Those kinds of things. And so for me, where transformation started to fail was when we decoupled the methodology from the organizational structure and started equating transformation to, are people doing Scrum? Do we have the Scrum roles? Are people doing SAFe? Do we have release train engineers? Things like that. And what how that manifests in a lot of organizations is we have people running around doing the Agile methodology things in organizations that are not lined up properly to actually be able to get the value from those things. And what we ended up doing is we took the same problem we had with team level agility and we transferred it to the enterprise. And instead of having Scrum Masters and daily stand-ups and reviews and retrospectives that weren't actually solving the problem, now we have bigger, heavier weight methodology that's not actually solving the problem, but for the same reason. So I came to the conclusion 6, 7, 8 years ago that transformation wasn't really about installing a methodology. The work of a transformation is about bringing the organization into alignment with the methodology that you choose. And so early stage transformation work is kind of like meet the organization where it is, begin the process of forming teams, recognize the presence of dependencies, and do Agile stuff, but often do it in a much heavier coordinated framework because the organization requires delivery safety, or at least it wants it, and you have all of these dependencies. And so in the presence of dependencies, you have to manage them because you haven't broken them yet. And so the first step of transformation was to start to form the organization and to start to teach it Agile, but to put in a series of compensating mechanisms that allow you to deal with work in the presence of dependencies, right? So that was first step. Second step was, okay, now let's start leaning out the delivery process. Let's start getting the portfolio to deliver or to plan work in smaller batches. Let's start figuring out how to get these integrated sets of teams to deliver strategically aligned enterprise value in a more small batch kind of repeatable process. While we're doing that, we start to lay the technical foundations for how are we going to do product management in the new world. We start laying the foundations for how you're going to start to have teams that can decouple themselves and refactor their technology so they're operating in a more encapsulated way. We want to start to ultimately break dependencies where it makes sense. And then once we have relatively dependency-free teams and encapsulated delivery units, now we can start to think about, okay, we're not really going to assign them projects per se, but we're going to start to basically invest in those teams as if they were products, right? So a word I've actually heard, we're using it too, is this idea of projects to products. The reason why we can start to have that conversation is because the world is starting to recognize that encapsulated teams formed around distinct business problems is the way that you make this work. And then for some of those teams need to be very adaptive and experimental, right? So you can start to lay out this journey of enterprise transformation. And that's the space that we've been in for the last, I guess probably 10 years, right, since we started, but, really hit our stride in it 3-4 years ago. And we started working on some really, really large accounts that were really invested in this way of thinking about things. And what was cool about it for them is that as they moved through these states, going back to our earlier hypothesis, totally focused on value the entire time, totally aligned with the programming portfolio structures within the organization, very respectful of the current stuff that was in place. And so as you started making changes, you could measure those changes, you could measure their efficacy, you could measure the impact that they were having on the organization, and you could actually go back to the business owners that were funding these transformations and say, look, here's the improvements that we actually made. Right? This is how your organization is legitimately performing better since you've been making these changes. And when you're able to prove that, you generate a bunch of good faith with the organization. But here's the interesting thing, and this is where I think that the conversation has to begin shifting. So let's suspend disbelief for just a minute. And let's say we have the enterprise product delivery organization totally well-formed. Right? We've done the Scrum, we've done the SAFe, we've done LAST, right? We've done whatever. We've reorganized around teams, we've broken dependencies, and the delivery organization is just rocking and rolling, right? Just suspend disbelief. We've done the transformation, everything's working perfect. Well, there's still places in the world where it's still an IT transformation. We're aligned with the business, but we haven't really created business agility per se. And the reason why is that the business doesn't necessarily understand how to exploit the capacity for change that the IT organization or the product delivery organization has built to its economic advantage. It doesn't really know how to look at its strategic plan and understand how that strategic plan lights up the different business capabilities and value streams that it's built. It doesn't necessarily understand the performance characteristics of an agile and adaptive enterprise. And so what it's still doing is it's still funneling big batch, large strategic initiatives through its portfolio, through its annual planning cycles. It's making big, gigantic bets in market. And so that's an artifact of an organization that doesn't know how to exploit the delivery capacity. So getting back to kind of the core story, what we fundamentally did is that we built an enterprise class system of delivery that the business doesn't know how to exploit. We've built a very reliable and predictable system of transformation, right? We can repeat this on demand, but we haven't basically brought the business effectively along because the business doesn't know how to exploit it. It doesn't know how to play. And again, right, getting to where we tell the story. So what I think we're going to have to do, and I'm hunting this, right? So I'm just kind of letting you guys in on some early thoughts. Like what I think we have to figure out how to do is stop, or maybe not stop, right? But like get to a point where we can have a conversation that says, this is the characteristics of an organization that can operate with agility, right? So we're not talking about Scrum. We're not talking about SAFe. We're not talking about Agile Transformation. There's almost like a line. And below the line are things like, how do we do Agile Transformation? How does Scrum work? Encapsulation, orchestration, right? All the things that you guys have been hearing me talk about for a long time, right? How do we get it, right? And so underneath the line is all the stuff around how we get to these characteristics. But the line is, here are the characteristics of the enterprise that is going to be able to deliver for the business. Okay, and then let the business decide if the delivery organization has those characteristics or not. But then it's like above the line, right? Assuming you have an organization that can deliver with these characteristics, how do we want the business to change to be able to most adequately support or to engage with this new operating model? How does the business, what does it look like once the business has reorged and it is now also in alignment with its delivery organization, encapsulated entity, encapsulated delivery units, encapsulated product lines, encapsulated whatever, right? And so we have this encapsulated set of business stuff that's driving work through an encapsulated delivery organization that's riding on top of encapsulated technology delivered by encapsulated teams, right? So encapsulation all the way down to the bottom, right? So what does it look like? What is the operating model? What does the system of delivery look like for the business once the IT organization has changed? And it's probably pretty subtle. Maybe this stuff is obvious to you guys. I don't know, right? We'll see. But it's like we kind of assume that once we change the product organization, the business is going to change. I don't think that's happening, right? I don't think it's happening broadly enough. So the next level down of this conversation as we begin to unpack it's going to be to explore, what does the business look like, assuming that it has an agile delivery capability underneath it? It's a pretty fascinating topic, right? Not going to try to unpack it here, right? Way too big a topic for the 20 minutes that we have left. But that's the direction that this stuff is heading. So the next thing is, once we know what the business looks like, that's going to sit on top of an agile system of delivery, how are we going to get the business to change? Some of the stuff that we're doing with one of our largest clients right now, it's really fascinating. I've been exploring this idea of top-down intent, bottom-up implementation for a long time. One of the things we've noticed about kind of the leading agile change model is that it's very fractal, right? Like the patterns that I've been talking about down here, they apply all the way up. When you look at how you transform large organizations, it's fractal all the way down, right? So it's really difficult to describe because all of this stuff, this encapsulation nests upon nests upon nests upon nests, right? And so like what we're starting to see are patterns like, this is gonna be really hard to explain. I almost wish I'd like done this whiteboard style or something because it's kind of easy when you start to do it in build sequences and things. But it's like you pick a slice of the organization and you organize it around business capabilities and you put in the governance structures and you align the metrics and you get it performing and you teach the business how to leverage it. And then you're doing this, you're like creating these like little triangles like all throughout the organization. Right, what starts to happen is that then you start to figure out how to group the triangles together differently where there's dependencies you can't break or where there's common business objectives or whatever. And then sometimes you group them and then you flip a piece of the business, right? So the business has to go from not only business capability aligned, maybe it goes from value stream alignment, or it goes from project-based funding to product-based funding based upon this new realignment. So what we're starting to see is this like kind of this intent up at the top, but all this building down at the bottom, and then you build it a bit, and then you roll it up and you refactor it, and then you grab some more stuff and you roll it up and you refactor it, and you roll it up and you refactor it. And again, so trying to figure out how to describe that. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be kind of like our base camp models, right? There's certain things. There's like you kind of have a team that delivers with predictability, and then you have a team that delivers in small batches, and you have a team that is broken dependencies with the rest of the organization and can now be aligned around a product or a feature set or what have you, right? You start to see this pattern of roll up where organizations can start to encapsulate And then once they've encapsulated, then they can be organized around value. And then those things roll up, and then those things can be organized around value, right? And so it's like you kind of start from the bottom, and it's like you're just poop, 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 and just kind of locking it in all the way. And so I think the hardest part of it is that the pattern is fundamentally the same. The fractal nature of it in the transformation strategy is really difficult to describe, because it's way easier to say, just train people in Scrum, train people in Safe, and it's going to fix it. But it only counts if it actually delivers the strategic value. Some of these mega large corporations that we're working with, it's like it just doesn't work that easy, right? These are really, really complex value networks. And so just teaching them Scrum or teaching them Safe or teaching them XP or teaching them tech practices or something just doesn't solve the problem. And so coming up with a pattern of what does it look like in an incredibly large organization to go through a business-oriented transformation, big key part of the story. And we're starting to have some really interesting success and case studies around that again, we're trying literally right now to try to figure out how to document and to talk about. And so the last bit, right? So if you might imagine, right, hypothesize with me for a moment where I have an entire organization that is organized around value. Right? The business is structured in such a way that it has an encapsulated product delivery organization that's built around encapsulated teams and encapsulated technology, and it totally understands how to execute value through this agile system of delivery that's integrated with the business. Now we have the ability to start looking at those value streams and really making decisions about how we realign them into or redeploy them rather as the needs of the organization change, right? As the value streams morph, how do we redeploy organizations or parts of organizations to solve different classes of problems? And so we've been exploring this idea of a system of improvement, right? So we see across the top, I didn't really highlight it as a first order concern, but is this idea of a system of delivery. It's the agile operating model at the team level, the enterprise level, and the business. The system of transformation that guides us through the enterprise transformation and then the ultimate transformation of the business. And then it's like, what does the organization need to continually monitor itself and adapt the business to be able to meet the changing needs? Not to adapt the work that flows through the business, but how to adapt the business itself. And so some of the things that we're exploring, right, that we're working with some clients on is like, how do you build a service that constantly monitors, like, not only the performance of a team or the performance of an organization, but continuously monitors its strategic alignment to enterprise objectives? How is it performing relative to that strategic alignment? What's its risk of failure, right? Those kinds of things. Business architecture reevaluation. Like when we're looking at the strategy and what initiatives are going to flow through the system to light up that strategy, understanding if we have the right things and what kind of improvements do we need to make to the organizational design and architecture. So it's like you start to have a different class of problem. It's like you have the work that moves through the system that needs to be adaptive, but then you have the organization or the, almost organism. I almost misspoke, but that's probably a better word. It's like the organization itself becomes like a cellular organism that can respond to a changing ecosystem around it. And so all of that ability to move is really predicated on the notion that the organizational units themselves are loosely coupled and can redeploy and reform around other business initiatives. And so it's just a really, really fascinating process. So getting back to kind of the theme of like why transformation fails, why business agility fails, right? It kind of starts with is sometimes we're too myopic in how we're thinking about it. We're thinking about team level agility as if it's business agility, and it's not. I think sometimes we're thinking about enterprise level agility as business agility, and it's really not. It's really, at its best, it's having the ability to adapt and respond to different kinds of work that come through the system. From a system of transformation perspective, very often we are only changing the ability of the delivery organization to perform differently, but we're not bringing the business along because we haven't really proven anything to the business that they can rely on. So why would they change until the delivery organization gets its act in order? Well, again, right? So shifting the conversation, elevating the conversation, we need to get to a place where we're like, have those three boxes or those three bubbles in my diagram kind of like below the line, right? Let's get them below the line. And now we can start to talk about characteristics of an agile delivery organization and start to talk about how the business needs to reorganize around that. What are the transformation patterns associated with business-focused change, assuming, again, that the product organization is done its part. And then once we have true alignment, true encapsulation between the business, the technology, the organization, right? What are the mechanisms that we put into place to be able to continuously adapt that organization in a way that kind of makes sense, right? So that's the story that we're starting to try to figure out. And so in practice, right? So when you're going through kind of business transformation like this, what we're starting to see, and this is a very useful metaphor for us that we're starting to explore, is you have these three systems that kind of work together. And so in an early stage transformation, what you're doing is you're not walking in and you're not saying, okay, let's just move this organization to agile. What we're doing is we're going in and we're saying, okay, let's go start to figure out like what an agile transformation office might look like, right? How are we going to start to educate the enterprise on what team level agility looks like, what enterprise level agility looks like, what business agility looks like? How are we going to get really clear on which pieces of the organization are ready to go? Which pieces do we understand? How are we going to orchestrate all of this change across the enterprise, make sure that it's controlled and structured and measured, and it's done in a way that we can prove business results over time? And so everything around the instantiation of the change practice is what we're kind of calling system of transformation. And that system is all about establishing a playbook for not only how are we going to create an agile operating model, but how are we going to get there, and then actually orchestrating the process of change, right? So all of the things around how we get there, looks like my screen froze. This is scaring me a little bit. Oh, okay, there we go. It looks like I'm back. So everything around how we orchestrate the change is what I would call a system of transformation. Everything around how we produce product, what we call is a system of delivery. So what's kind of cool, right, is that what you find is that in a large enterprise, you're going to have some parts of the organization that are going to need to do very lean startup kinds of things, right? Very experimental, very labs oriented. You're going to have some parts of the organization that are going to be really naturally aligned to doing Scrum and XP and technical practices and such. You're going to have some parts of the organization that are going to need loose coordination between teams, minimal dependency management, systems that are very easy to roll up, and you're going to have, maybe they'd be able to do less. You're going to have some parts of your organization that are going to have higher levels of dependencies, are going to need a safe-like model. You're going to have some legacy parts of your organization that are going to be able to exploit Agile, but they're going to have a lot more dependency management than even SAFe requires. You can still do some iterative and incremental team-based work, but you're going to need actually more than SAFe prescribes, okay? And so what I encourage you to do is to think of your organization as a palette of different needs or different methodology based upon the adaptive needs of the marketplace and the nature of the dependencies in the enterprise. So be prepared to understand that you're going to have multiple systems of delivery operating in parallel, and you're not going to have like a one-size-fits-all model. The system of transformation is going to make the evaluation as to which pieces of the organization need to go to which states of maturity, which impediments are worthy of removing, and then if impediments are going to be removed, orchestrating that ecosystem change to start to get closer and closer and closer to the methodology you want. So the system of transformation starts to measure those leading indicators that we want that basically say, is the system maturing to its desired end state? As it's building out the system, it's instantiating these systems of delivery that have to be able to prove that they're actually producing value and that they're strategically aligned to the goals set out at the executive level strategy stuff, right? So if I can't measure how I'm making progress and I can't measure the results of that progress, right, in terms of real business value, things like, did I train Scrum Masters? Did I teach people Scrum? Are people using SAFe, right? All that kind of stuff just doesn't matter, right? It just doesn't matter. And then the third piece that I think we need to start thinking about is we're moving towards creating an adaptive enterprise. So we have to start to build the mechanisms within the organization, not just for the backlog of work that's moving through the system of delivery to change, but how do I change the system of delivery itself? I've never actually said this in the context of this talk, but if you think about, right, go back down to team level Scrum, and we have retrospectives, right? So what's the idea behind a retrospective? It's like, I have this encapsulated team with very few dependencies, and at least ideally, and the team does its work, right? It evaluates the work, right? It's going through sprint planning, does reviews and retrospectives, and it gets to a place where it says, okay, we either did it, we didn't, we claim velocity, we don't, right? All that kind of stuff. That's kind of like the business performance analog, right? System of delivery performance. And then we have this retrospective where we say, okay, what can we do to be more efficient, right? It's a little bit like the same as that is like at an organizational level. So I don't want to like make an analog to like an organizational retrospective, because I think it's more complicated than that, because I think there's different services that need to be built: coaching services, training services, evaluation services, assessment services, business architecture alignment, strategic alignment, different things. There's different things that need to happen in the system of continuous improvement, but it needs to start being built in the early stage of the transformation, because we know that's where it's actually headed. And over time, right, through the transformation, that we start to see how these systems work together. So it's like the system of transformation begets the system of delivery, system of transformation begets the system of continuous improvement. System of continuous improvement starts to operate on the system of delivery. They start to inform each other, right? And then we just create this ecosystem where you have the system of delivery, system of continuous improvement that are kind of operating after the transformation as a in the business, kind of on the business kind of metaphor, right? So now, and this is maybe my last point regarding transformation. Here's the interesting thing, right? There's a lot of companies that are probably on their fifth or sixth. I was talking with one company yesterday, and the guy goes like, yeah, we're on our sixth Agile transformation. And I'm just like, wow, exhausting. One of the largest companies we're working with right now, had been at transformation for about 8 years before we started kind of helping them move down this path. And there's a lot of fits and starts because we're not taking these things into consideration. But here's the point that I want to make. Companies are getting transformation fatigue, right? They want to say, okay, we've transformed, we're agile, we're done. Okay. And so part of it is we go, well, we're never done, right? We're never done changing. We're never done evolving. We're never done learning. But at some point, I think we need to adopt a language that kind of says, okay, the lift and shift to this adaptive business model is complete, right? We're organized around value. We've broken dependencies. We've aligned with the business. We're operating as encapsulated units. We can tie those encapsulated units to organizational strategy. We can start to have work items come out of the strategy, start to be deployed out to the units, right? And it's kind of good, right? It's at least at a good starting place. But that doesn't mean that we're done, right? Because, right, business strategies change, right? We have to be able to adapt the enterprise to the needs of the market. And so this metaphor of having a system of delivery that operates kind of like does the work of the organization and is driving the work through. And then on the backside, we have the system of continuous improvement that isn't transformation office per se anymore, but it's really it's an organizational capability that kind of monitors the performance and health of the system of delivery, and then works as almost like an immune system to adapt it and to change it and to help it reorganize to the needs of like changing strategic demand. That's the pattern, right? That's what I think is happening. And one thing I can promise you is, whether you guys think I'm right, wrong, whatever, whether you think it's too heavy, too big, too complicated, because there's risk of that when you start to talk about enterprise transformation. What I can tell you is that this kind of message is really resonating with the executives that we're talking about. So what I think is cool is that we're going to figure out how to talk about it better. We're going to figure out how to articulate it better, keep talking about it in forums like this, because for better or for worse, it's this kind of language is really meeting the needs of the marketplace. And I think there's something here that's worth having a conversation about. So happy to engage with you guys in that conversation. Connect with me on LinkedIn, hit our Facebook page, like however, right, email me, whatever. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of, and interested in having this conversation with people who are doing similar work. So please let me know if there's anything that I can do to help. With that, I'm going to see, like, Sabrina, are there any like questions? Like, I don't know how to get out on my screen and kind of see the Q&A while
Yeah, Mike, we've got one question in here.
Yeah, what do you got?
Shane, and it's, I wonder if the ability of a business to pivot might require being flexible with people moving roles within an organization. Would people have to change their jobs periodically to allow the business to be adaptable?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So I think there's two levels of adaptability. And probably there's more, right? You could probably unpack it on lots of different dimensions. But I think one of the problems that we have organizationally, and I think it goes back to like the Eli Goldratt, the goal, the early lean stuff, the early theory of constraints, but the idea of cost accounting versus throughput accounting. And we tend to think in most organizations that we deploy people to problems, right? And people are expensive, and people have unique skill sets, and they're not fungible. And so like a lot of times we want to get the best people on the best work, and we split them across lots of different things, right? And all kinds of different stuff. And what we end up doing is we end up creating very rigid, non-resilient organizations when we do stuff like that. So the first shift we have to figure out how to make when we're talking about business agility is this idea is what we're really doing is we're deploying capabilities, the ability to produce things, to strategy. Okay. And so I don't really think as a first order concern, do I have the people to do it? I think, do I have the performant business capabilities to do it? Right. So if I have these units, right, these encapsulated units that are performing really well and they're delivering against the strategic objectives, cool. Right? Now, I know that within those units, I have technology, I have process, I have people, right, that are all operating. And, we know in Agile, right, the more, what do we call, I could call them T-shaped people, right? The more people can do more things, right, the more flexibility we have as an enterprise. And that's great, but like we know practically not everybody can do everything. Okay? And so there's a bit of a black art, right? So within a delivery unit, I would like to have resilience within that unit, which basically means I have more people that can do more things. I'm focused on, it's where the throughput versus cost accounting goes. I'm focused on the throughput of the delivery unit more so than I am focused on the individual performance of any given team member within that unit. And the belief of me and Agilists and things like that is that the more people that can do more things, I can maximize throughput, sometimes at the expense of individual productivity. And in Agile, that's a trade-off that we're explicitly willing to make. Now, what's interesting, right, is that you're going to get some of those people that are probably like T-shaped enough to be able to go from business problem to business problem to business problem to business problem. And so where I think we're going to end up landing is with some teams that are really more static and they're focused on more static type business problems. And then you're going to end up with some teams that are more dynamic, filled with polyglot programmers and more T-shaped people and can do more different kinds of things. And those are going to be the teams that you're going to more dynamically redeploy to other kinds of different things. But yeah, it's absolutely a problem you have to solve, and it's really organizational specific.